Okay, so let's unpack this, because when you hear the phrase, an open door of opportunity, I mean, a very specific image probably comes to mind, right?
Well, absolutely. You think of something easy.
Right. You're thinking of this completely resistance-free path. It's that smooth corporate promotion where everything just magically falls into place for you.
Yeah, or like a sudden stroke of good luck, where it feels like the universe is basically whispering, yes, walk right through. I've cleared all the obstacles.
Exactly. Because we are so hardwired to interpret a lack of friction as a sign that we're moving in the right direction. If it's easy, it must be right. But the historical and theological document we are diving into today argues the exact opposite.
It really does. It completely flips the script.
It does, and it asks this fascinating question. What if the open door isn't some gentle breeze of good fortune? What if it's actually an invitation to a battlefield?
Yeah, and that totally shatters our modern assumptions about opportunity.
Right.
Because the source material we're analyzing today, it's an in-depth exploration of the events in Acts chapter 14.
Right.
And it traces the first major missionary journey of the early Christian figures, Paul and Barnabas. But, I mean, the author doesn't treat this like a simple travelogue.
No, not at all.
The entire historical narrative is framed around this really intense concept of spiritual warfare. So, instead of defining an open door as a welcoming empty room, the author defines it as a violent, dramatic event.
Which is such a jarring shift in perspective.
It is.
Yeah.
The framework here is that Jesus is quite literally breaking into enemy territory, basically Satan's house, to plunder souls. It just completely changes the way you look at what success and opportunity actually cost.
And that right there, that is our mission for you, the listener, in this deep dive. We're going straight into the source material to completely redefine what an open door of opportunity actually looks like in the real world.
Yeah, we're going to get really granular with it.
We are. We'll trace the geographical realities of this first century journey across the Mediterranean and Asia Minor. And, we'll explore the massive world-altering theological shifts that were basically fracturing the early Christian church at the time.
The cultural tension was just off the charts.
Oh, it was massive. And most importantly, we want to extract the timeless principles for anyone dealing with fierce opposition. So, if you've ever felt like you're doing the exact right thing, but suddenly you are hitting a brick wall of unfair resistance, well, keep listening. This is going to give you a completely new lens on your own struggles.
So to start shifting that lens, we really need to look at how the author specifically defines this open door, because he breaks it down into this 6-point framework that really upends how we usually think about progress.
Okay, let's go through those.
Right, so the first point is straightforward enough. He says the door is simply a metaphor for opportunity. We see this all over ancient literature and in Paul's own writings.
Sure, that makes sense. A door equals a chance to do something.
Exactly. But the second point is where things get really aggressive. The opportunity is opened by the Holy Spirit, but the mechanism of that opening is described as Jesus entering Satan's house to plunder souls who are appointed for eternal life.
See, I just have to linger on that word for a second. Plunder.
Yeah.
Because you don't politely knock on a door to plunder a house.
No, you definitely don't.
You don't hand out a pamphlet. Plundering is a hostile takeover. It implies that the world these early missionaries are walking into, it isn't neutral territory.
Right, it's heavily occupied enemy ground.
Yeah, it brings this incredibly active, visceral visual to the whole concept of evangelism. You aren't just inviting people to a meeting, you are literally breaking people out of a fortress.
Which perfectly explains the third point of the author's definition. Because if you're breaking into an occupied fortress, you are going to trigger alarms.
Right, the guards are going to show up.
Exactly. You are going to face immediate hostile resistance. The open door, according to this text, comes with a guarantee of many Satan-inspired opponents. And this leads directly into the fourth point, which is arguably the most crucial for anyone facing pushback today.
Okay, what's that?
The early missionaries did not view those opponents as a sign of a closed door.
And that is the one that really challenges my own thinking. Because, if I try to start a new project or launch a business or speak up about something in my community, and I immediately face this fierce, organized pushback, my very first instinct is to think, well, I guess that door is closed.
Yeah, the universe is telling me no.
Exactly. Time to pack it up and find something easier. We just naturally seek the path of least resistance.
We do. We equate comfort with being in the center of God's will or the universe's favor.
Yeah.
But for Paul and Barnabas, Resistance was the confirmation that they were actually in the right place.
They expected the friction.
They did. They weren't looking for a comfortable ministry. They knew that a massive spiritual heist was going to draw fire. And the stakes of this heist are laid out in the final 2 points of the author's definition.
Which are
Point 5 is that the gospel had to be fully preached to the Gentiles. And point 6 is that the resulting plunder was going to be large numbers of these non-Jewish converts entering the church without becoming Jewish proselytes.
Okay, let's stop right there and unpack the mechanics of that. Because for a modern listener, the phrase becoming a Jewish proselyte might just sound like, I don't know, ancient religious bureaucracy.
Right, just checking some boxes.
Yeah, but for the people living through this, it was a world-ending paradigm shift, wasn't it? I mean, Christianity was born entirely out of Judaism.
Completely. Try to put yourself in the mindset of a first-century Jewish believer. Your entire worldview, handed down for thousands of years, is built on the law of Moses.
Right.
It's built on diet, on circumcision, on temple purity. You believe Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. So the logical assumption is that if a Greek or a Roman wants to follow the Jewish Messiah, well, they first have to become Jewish.
They have to assimilate.
Exactly. They have to adopt the customs, undergo the rituals, and essentially become part of Judaism. That was the established, unquestioned order of the universe for them.
So Paul and Barnabas are essentially bypassing this entire initiation process. It's like, imagine a highly exclusive, ancient private club with centuries of strict entry requirements.
That's a great way to put it.
And suddenly, 2 guys show up and start propping the back doors wide open, letting hundreds of outsiders flood into the VIP room without filling out a single piece of paperwork or paying the dues.
The original members would lose their minds.
The sheer cultural panic that would cause must have been overwhelming. The text mentions this had happened in isolated incidents before, right? Like on the road to Gaza or in Caesarea. But now it's becoming a systemic, massive influx.
It was an existential threat to their cultural identity. And realizing the sheer weight of that theological shift makes the physical reality of their journey that much more intense. If we look at the geographical map detailing this first missionary journey, you see the sheer scale of what they were attempting.
The logistics alone are just staggering. We are talking about Paul, Barnabas, and a younger assistant named John Mark starting down in Antioch in Syria.
Right.
And they have to secure passage across the Mediterranean Sea to the island of Cyprus. They traverse that entire island on foot from Salamis to Paphos. Then they get back on a boat, sail north to the mainland of Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and push up into the rugged, dangerous regions of Pamphylia, Pisidia, and Galatia.
Yeah, and you don't just buy a plane ticket back then.
Oh.
You are dealing with volatile weather, you've got bandits in the Taurus Mountains, and just absolute grinding exhaustion.
Exactly. And as they push deeper into these mainland regions, this theological concept of an open door crashes headfirst into raw, gritty reality. And the historical data brings us to a city that serves as a perfect blueprint for this entire dynamic.
The city of Iconium.
Yes, Iconium. It's such a fascinating place. Geographically, it's located in the region of Phrygia, sitting right on a major trade route that connected Ephesus to Syria, so it's wealthy.
Very wealthy.
It has thriving orchards, huge agricultural output, and this constant flow of merchants and money. But the historical backdrop the source provides gives us a massive clue about the psychology of the people living there. It was a Greek city-state, and despite the growing shadow of the Roman Empire all around them, it was fiercely, stubbornly Greek in its temper.
The cultural pride there was immense, and it was tied directly to their very foundation myth. The name Iconium is derived from the Greek word icon, which means image.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and the local mythology claimed that after a massive world-destroying flood, the gods Prometheus and Athena came to that exact spot. According to the myth, they took the local mud, formed images of humans, and breathed life into them to repopulate the earth.
See, I love that detail. It's not just a random piece of trivia. It explains their civic ego perfectly.
It really does.
If you live in Iconium, you don't just think you live in a nice trade town. You believe your city is the literal birthplace of post-flood humanity. You are the original images. That breeds a very specific kind of cultural arrogance and resistance to outside ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
So what do Paul and Barnabas do when they walk into this wealthy, stubborn, mythologically entrenched city?
Well, they fall back on a very deliberate, calculated strategy. They head straight for the local Jewish synagogue.
Which, honestly, why there? If the ultimate goal is to reach the pagan Gentiles, why start with the Jewish population?
Because of the shared baseline. If you walk into the local marketplace and start talking to pagans about a crucified Savior, you have zero common ground.
Right. They just look at you like you were crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the synagogue, you have generations of shared history. You have the writings of Moses, you have the prophets, you have this built-in expectation of a Messiah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so Paul can walk in, open the scrolls of Isaiah, and say, the one we've all been waiting for. He arrived. It's an immediate, powerful bridge.
And the strategy works, right? The historical account says they spoke with such power that a massive group of both Jews and Greeks believed. The door bursts open. The plunder is happening in real time.
But, perfectly aligning with the author's definition, the moment the door opens, the alarms go off.
Right on cue.
The blowback is instantaneous. The text records that the Jews who refused to believe didn't just, disagree quietly. They actively stirred up the local Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the missionaries.
That phrase, poison their minds, is so evocative. It tells us we aren't looking at a polite theological debate over tea. This is a deliberate, targeted misinformation campaign.
Totally.
They are going out into the broader pagan community and spreading toxic narratives. They are manipulating the public perception to turn the city into a hostile environment. And we see this all the time today, right? Like with social media algorithms or modern political campaigns, how quickly a narrative can be spun to completely demonize someone before they even have a chance to defend themselves.
It's the exact same tactic. And knowing that this toxic campaign is actively spreading through the city, we see a reaction from Paul and Barnabas that completely defies logic. The narrative says that because of this opposition, they stayed there for a considerable time, speaking out courageously.
And this is where I have to pause and look at their psychology, because that makes absolutely no sense to a modern survival instinct.
None at all.
If you are in a foreign city and you know for a fact that powerful people are actively poisoning the community against you and the tension is rising every single day, isn't that your cue to leave?
You'd think so.
Why would they dig their heels in and stay because it was getting dangerous?
Because they understood the vulnerability of the new converts. Think about it, if they leave the moment the pressure spikes, those brand new believers who just abandoned their ancestral traditions, they're left completely defenseless against a coordinated cultural attack.
Oh, wow.
Paul and Barnabas stayed to provide cover fire, but they didn't just use words to hold the line. The historical record emphasizes that during this tense standoff, God was granting miraculous signs and wonders to be performed through their hands.
Let's talk about the mechanics of those miracles for a second, because the author makes a very crucial distinction here about why these sign gifts were happening. It's so easy to read ancient accounts and just view miracles as like magical special effects to make the story more exciting.
Right, like an action movie.
Exactly. But the source argues these were highly specific credentials.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of a citizen of Iconium. These two strangers roll into town claiming that everything you know about the gods is wrong, and that a carpenter who was executed in Judea is actually the Lord of the universe.
It sounds absurd to them.
Completely. And furthermore, they have absolutely no written New Testament to back this up. The Gospels haven't been written yet. The letters of Paul don't exist. There is no Bible to hand out. Why should anyone believe them?
They need authentication. They need something undeniable to prove that they are actually speaking on behalf of the Creator.
Precisely. The miracles were the undeniable credentials of their authority. And the author draws this really sharp contrast to our modern era, pointing out that today we have the completed texts. We have the history, the letters, the entire Bible to study and scrutinize.
Right.
We don't require an apostle to walk into a room and heal a paralyzed person just to prove that the theology is sound. But in the first century, on the absolute frontier of this new movement, those supernatural signs were the only way to authenticate the message of grace against centuries of entrenched paganism.
So you have this incredibly volatile mix in the city. You have genuine miracles happening on one side and this deliberate toxic smear campaign happening on the other. And it completely fractures the city.
It splits it right down the middle.
Yeah. The population divides. Some side with the entrenched establishment and some side with the apostles.
And when a society fractures that deeply, reason goes right out the window. The author points out a deeply unsettling truth about spiritual warfare and human nature. When the enemy wants to counterattack, they rely on the mob.
That mentality is terrifying because it strips away all individual accountability. You see it online all the time, the digital dog pile.
Oh, constantly.
When people get swept up in a mob, a complex, nuanced debate devolves into raw tribal violence. A group of individuals who might be perfectly reasonable on their own suddenly become a single, mindless organism acting purely on adrenaline and hatred.
That is exactly what happens in Iconium. The Gentiles and the city rulers form a violent coalition with one goal: to drag Paul and Barnabas into the street and stone them to death.
It's not a legal proceeding.
No, there's no trial, no charges read. It's a lynching. And it is only at this absolute breaking point, when the stones are literally about to be thrown, that the missionaries finally decide the door in Iconium is closed. They discover the plot and they run for their lives.
But they don't retreat to safety. I mean, they don't head back to the coast to catch a boat home. They push further inland, moving south into the geographical region of Lycaonia. And I love the linguistic detail the source provides here. Lycaonia translates to land of the wolf.
It's so fitting.
They escape the sophisticated, wealthy city of the image, only to flee directly into the wilderness of the wolf.
It just highlights the relentless nature of their mission. They trade one set of dangers for an entirely new, unfamiliar set. They settle into a city called Lystra. And the historical and geographical context of Lystra is really the key to understanding the absolute chaos that is about to unfold.
Lystra is only about 18 miles south of Iconium, but it might as well be on a different planet.
Totally.
The text notes that unlike Iconium, Lystra was a Roman colony that was isolated. It was not situated on the main, bustling trade roads.
And that isolation is the driving factor for the culture clash. When a city is bypassed by the main highways of commerce and empire, it becomes an echo chamber. It preserves its ancient local traditions without any dilution from the outside world. The people of Lystra were deeply, unapologetically pagan. They didn't have that cosmopolitan gloss of Iconium.
So Paul and Barnabas, still catching their breath from a near-death experience, walk into this deeply isolated, unfiltered pagan stronghold. And almost immediately, they encounter a man sitting in the crowd who changes everything.
Yeah, the narrative stresses the severity of this man's condition. He isn't just dealing with a limp or a temporary injury. He has been lame from birth.
He has never walked a single step in his entire life.
Never. The author makes it very clear that from a medical and societal standpoint, this is an undeniable, permanent, hopeless reality.
But this man is listening to Paul preach, and we get this incredible silent interaction between the two of them. Paul stops speaking. He stares intently at the man. And the text notes that Paul perceived that this man had the faith to be healed.
We really need to explore the mechanics of that faith, because the author draws a very fine line here that is so easy to miss. It wasn't just a generic, vague hope. The text points out that the man's faith wasn't merely acknowledging that God possessed the theoretical power to heal him.
The distinction is between passive theology and active confidence. It's one thing to say, I believe the creator of the universe is powerful enough to fix my legs.
Yeah, lots of people believe that.
But it's a completely different level of faith to look at a stranger speaking in the street and know with absolute certainty the creator is going to use that man to fix my legs right now. It was a highly specific, present tense confidence.
And Paul responds to that act of confidence instantly. He doesn't pray a long, elaborate prayer. He just yells out with a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet."
Yeah, the man doesn't just, struggle to a standing position. He leaps up.
He leaps.
A man whose leg muscles have never been used, who has no neurological pathway for balance or walking, springs into the air and begins walking around.
You really have to visualize the shockwave that sends through an isolated town. An undeniable permanent tragedy is reversed in a split second. The crowd erupts. But because of their isolation, because they have zero concept of a Jewish Messiah or monotheism, their reaction goes in a wildly unexpected direction.
The language barrier kicks in with devastating effect. The crowd starts screaming, but they aren't speaking Greek. They revert to their local Lycaonian dialect.
Which Paul doesn't speak.
No. Paul and Barnabas are standing there, watching the crowd go absolutely wild, but they have no idea what is actually being said, and what they are screaming is, "The gods have come down to us in human form."
This is where their isolated pagan frame of reference takes over completely. They don't have categories for prophets or apostles. In their worldview, if someone performs a miracle of this magnitude, there's only one logical explanation. The Greek pantheon is literally walking among them.
They immediately assign identities to them based on their appearance and actions. They look at Barnabas, who is likely the older, quieter, perhaps more imposing figure, and they call him Zeus, the king of the gods. Right. And they look at Paul, who has been doing all the talking, and they call him Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods and the patron deity of oratory.
And it doesn't just stop at a rumor in the crowd. The situation escalates with terrifying speed. The temple of Zeus was located just outside the city gates. The actual priest of Zeus hears the commotion, realizes that his god has supposedly manifested in the flesh, and he just springs into action.
I just want to pause and appreciate the pure, unadulterated comedy and chaos of this scene.
It's unbelievable.
Imagine you are Paul. You've just performed an incredible miracle. You're feeling pretty good about the impact of your message. The crowd is cheering. You can't understand a word they are saying, but everyone seems really happy.
Hey, ministry's going great today.
Exactly. And then the crowd parts, and the local priest shows up at the city gates dragging literal farm animals, bulls, draped in floral garlands, preparing to slaughter them at your feet. It is the ultimate lost in translation nightmare.
It's absurd, but it's also incredibly dangerous. And the author makes a brilliant, profound observation here about the nature of spiritual warfare. When the enemy fails to stop you with violence, he will pivot and try to stop you with praise.
That is such a deep insight. The source explicitly argues that too much persecution has destroyed some people, but too much praise has ruined far more.
Think about it from a strategic standpoint. The mob in Iconium failed to stop the message. The stones didn't work. So in Lystra, the tactic shifts. Instead of trying to kill the messengers, the culture tries to absorb them.
Wow.
If Paul and Barnabas accept the worship, they immediately invalidate their own message. They become just another local myth. The gospel is neutralized not by hatred, but by idolatry. It's a far more subtle and seductive trap.
It's the danger of platform and ego. I mean, how many modern leaders, influencers, or innovators survive the initial brutal criticism, only to be completely destroyed the moment the culture decides to put them on a pedestal and worship them?
Happens all the time.
They lose their original mission because they start believing their own hype. Paul and Barnabas are facing a literal version of that trap.
And the moment they understand what the crowd is actually doing, their reaction is incredibly visceral. They don't politely decline the offer.
They panic in the best possible way. The historical account says they tore their clothes and rushed headlong into the crowd. For a modern listener, tearing your clothes might just seem dramatic, but in their cultural context, what did that actually signify?
It was the ultimate expression of grief and horror. Specifically, it was the traditional Jewish reaction to witnessing blatant blasphemy.
Right.
By ripping their garments, they were physically demonstrating their absolute disgust and rejection of what the crowd was attempting to do. They throw themselves into the middle of the mob screaming, "Men, why are you doing these things? We're just men with the exact same human nature as you."
They aggressively dismantle the pedestal. They refuse the power. And then Paul has to perform an incredibly difficult apologetic pivot on the fly. He realizes he can't preach the way he normally does.
This is a masterclass in adapting to your audience.
Yeah.
In the synagogues of Antioch or Iconium, Paul started with the Old Testament. He used Jewish history.
Because they knew it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here in Lystra, the people don't know who Moses is. They don't care about King David. They only know Zeus and Hermes. So Paul has to strip his message all the way back to the absolute foundation of human existence. He starts with creation.
He points out the absurdity of their actions. He tells them they need to turn from these worthless things. And the theological note here is crucial. When he says worthless things, he is specifically targeting their idols.
Yes.
He is referencing the core argument we see later in his letter to the Romans, the tragedy of humanity choosing to worship the created things like bulls, statues, myths, instead of the creator who actually made them.
He directs their attention away from the temple of Zeus and points them toward the natural world. He appeals to general revelation. He argues that the one true God didn't leave them without evidence. He points to the rain, the changing of the seasons, the harvests, the food that brings them joy.
Things they understand.
Right. He uses the rhythms of agriculture, something this rural town intimately understood, as undeniable proof of benevolent, singular creator.
He's basically saying, look at the sky, look at your crops. That isn't Zeus. That is the living God. And he wants a relationship with you, not a dead bull. It is a brilliant, culturally adapted argument. But the scary part is how deeply entrenched the pagan mindset is.
It really is.
The text explicitly notes that even with this impassioned, logical, tearful plea, they scarcely manage to stop the crowd from sacrificing to them.
It shows the sheer gravitational pull of an established worldview. You can't just undo generations of mythological conditioning with a single speech, even if a miracle just happened right in front of them. They barely avert the crisis. The barbecue is canceled, but the tension is incredibly thick.
And just as they manage to de-escalate the situation, the ghosts from their past arrive. The narrative takes an incredibly dark turn right here. We are told that hostile Jews arrive in Lystra from both Antioch and Iconium.
Now, think about the geography we established earlier. Antioch in Pisidia is roughly 100 miles away. Iconium is 18 miles away.
That's a long walk just to be mad at someone.
Seriously.
Yeah.
These agitators hated Paul's message so intensely that they literally formed a coalition, traveled across treacherous roads, and hunted him down in a rural backwater purely to ruin him. That is a terrifying level of dedication to a vendetta.
It really is. It's ancient stalking. And these agitators, who are highly skilled at poisoning minds, take one look at this volatile, confused crowd in Lystra and realize they have the perfect weapon. They inject their toxic narrative into a crowd that is already emotionally unstable from the miracle and the rejected sacrifice.
The author refers to the residents of Lystra as fickle. And nothing proves that more than what happens next. The agitators convince the crowd that Paul and Barnabas aren't gods, and they aren't messengers of the Creator. They are dangerous deceivers who deserve to be eradicated.
The psychological whiplash is stunning. The exact same crowd that was dragging bulls to the gates to worship Paul on a Tuesday is entirely convinced to murder him by Thursday. The pendulum swings from absolute praise to absolute unrestrained violence, and this time, they don't escape. The mob stones Paul.
It is the brutal physical manifestation of the spiritual warfare we talked about in the very beginning. The open door has many opponents, and here the opposition takes the form of rocks to the skull. They pelt him until they are absolutely convinced he is dead.
Which is just horrific to imagine.
And to add insult to the violence, they drag his bleeding body out of the city gates and leave him in the dirt like garbage.
From a human perspective, it is a total, devastating defeat. The door hasn't just been closed, it has been violently slammed shut and barricaded. The mission is over. The great apostle is a corpse outside a pagan colony.
But the narrative provides this incredibly sparse yet powerful detail. Verse 20 says, "But after the disciples had surrounded him, he got up and went back into the city."
We really have to sit with that sentence for a minute. The new believers, the very people who just watched their mentor get executed by their own neighbors, creep out of the city to surround his body.
Yeah.
And whether this was a literal resurrection from the dead or just an instantaneous, miraculous healing of fatal trauma, Paul's recovery is immediate. He opens his eyes, he spits out the blood.
And his next action is what truly defines his character and his understanding of the mission. The text notes that Paul never did a braver thing in his entire life than what he did in that moment. He doesn't run away into the hills. He stands up, looks at the very gates that he was just dragged through, and he walks straight back into the city that just tried to murder him.
What drives a human being to do that? To walk back into the mouth of the wolf?
It goes all the way back to the author's fourth point of the definition. Opponents and violence are not an indication of a closed door. Paul knew that the small group of disciples standing around him in the dirt were the plunder. They were the prize he had come to rescue from Satan's house. And he wasn't going to let a stoning intimidate him into abandoning them. He goes back in to show them that the message is stronger than the mob.
Though it is worth noting that he doesn't stay indefinitely, right? Having proved his point and strengthened those believers, the historical record shows that the very next day, he and Barnabas finally pack up and leave for Derbe.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most counterintuitive phase of this entire journey. They travel about 35 miles southeast to the city of Derbe. And here, finally, they experience a season of sustained, somewhat peaceful success.
A much-needed break.
Exactly. The text says they preached the gospel and made many disciples. They even convert a man named Gaius, who becomes a crucial companion for Paul in his later travels.
So they are sitting in Derbe. They have a pocket of believers. But if you look at the map, they are now standing on the extreme eastern edge of the Galatian province. They face a massive logistical choice about how to get home.
And the map is incredibly revealing here. Just about 160 miles further east, through a mountain pass, is the city of Tarsus.
Tarsus is Paul's hometown, right?
It is. It represents safety, family, and a massive Roman road system that leads directly back down the coast to their home base in Syrian Antioch. It is the logical, efficient, and infinitely safer route home.
Any rational person who has just been expelled from 2 cities and stoned to near death in a third would take the road to Tarsus. You would say, we did our job, we planted the flags, now let's get out of the danger zone and recover.
Of course you would.
But they don't do that. They completely defy all survival instincts. They turn their backs on Tarsus and they turn around. They decide to retrace their steps.
Wild.
They literally walk back down the exact same road, back into Lystra, where the mob is probably still cleaning up the rocks they used to crush Paul.
Yeah.
Then they walk back into Iconium, where the authorities had plotted to execute them. And then back to Pisidian Antioch, where they were originally thrown out.
It is absolute madness to the modern mind. Why would you deliberately re-enter the hostile territory you barely escaped?
It's like escaping a burning building, finally getting out onto the front lawn and catching your breath, and then turning around and sprinting right back into the flames. Not to save more people, but simply to find the people who are still trapped inside and teach them how to reinforce the walls so the roof doesn't collapse on them. They know the structural weak points of that pagan culture better than the new converts do.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. The text is very clear on their motivation. The purpose of this return trip was not evangelism, it was discipleship.
Right, big difference.
Huge difference. They weren't trying to draw massive crowds or attract new hostility. They were returning specifically to strengthen the souls of the disciples and encourage them to continue in the faith.
They realize that making a convert is only the first step. If you abandon them immediately, the culture will inevitably crush them. They are risking their lives to protect the plunder. But the way they encourage them is fascinating because it's not a soft, comforting message. They don't walk in and say, "Don't worry, the worst is over. God is going to make your life easy now."
Far from it. The message Paul delivers to these new churches is stark and sobering. He looks at these believers, probably with the fresh scars still visible on his own face, from his stoning in Lystra, and he tells them, "We must enter the kingdom of God through many persecutions."
We really need to unpack the theological jargon in that warning because the source makes a very specific point about what Paul means by the kingdom of God and the timeline of this suffering.
Right. When Paul says they must enter the kingdom of God, the author notes that he is specifically referring to the future messianic kingdom, often called the millennium. It's the theological concept of a future era where Christ rules physically on earth in peace. The crucial point here is that entrance into this glorious kingdom is future, but the path to get there is paved with present reality.
And that present reality is tribulation. Not necessarily the tribulation like the apocalyptic end times event, but everyday, grinding, violent tribulation and persecution. Paul is managing their expectations. He is ensuring they understand the true cost of their new faith.
Because if you promise new believers a life of comfort the first time they face opposition, their faith will shatter because they'll think God abandoned them.
Exactly.
By warning them that persecution is actually a prerequisite, he is armoring their psychology against the inevitable attacks. He's redefining their expectations of the open door, just as the author redefined it for us at the beginning.
And he backs up this tough teaching with practical organization. The text notes that they didn't just preach and run, they appointed elders in every single church. They established local leadership structures, committing them to the Lord with prayer and fasting. They knew these Gentile believers needed a support system to survive the spiritual warfare in their cities.
The prioritization of structure over their own safety shows incredible leadership. They meticulously organized the chaotic results of their mission before they finally made their way back to the coast, passing through Pisidia and Pamphylia, preaching in Perga, and finally catching a ship from Italia.
Which brings us to the conclusion of this massive undertaking. They finally sail back into the harbor of Syrian Antioch, the home base where this whole crazy journey started years earlier.
And the report they delivered to their home church is a masterclass in summarizing a paradigm shift. They gather the entire congregation together, but they don't just list the cities they visited or the miles they walked. They summarize the entire battered, bloody, miraculous journey with one profound phrase. God had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles.
There's that phrase again, the door of faith. It goes all the way back to the mission we set at the beginning of this deep dive. The plunder was successful. They proved that the Creator was granting salvation to the pagan world equally with the Jewish world, entirely by faith, without the bureaucracy of becoming Jewish proselytes.
Yes.
The door was open, it was covered in mud and blood, it was surrounded by mobs, but it was definitively open.
And the impact of this journey doesn't just fade into history. The author provides a vital piece of timeline context that connects this raw history to the foundational theology of the entire Christian world. After returning to Antioch, while Paul is likely still recovering from the sheer physical trauma of the journey, he sits down to write a letter.
And not just any letter. He writes the Epistle to the Galatians. It is widely considered by scholars to be Paul's first inspired epistle. The text dates this to the late AD 40s, probably around AD 49, right before the massive theological conference in Jerusalem.
And who is the audience for this foundational theological document? He is writing it directly to the people in Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. He is writing to the very churches he just bled for.
That context changes everything. When you read the book of Galatians now, you aren't just reading dry, abstract theology about grace versus law. You are reading a desperate, passionate letter written to people who live in the land of the wolf.
Absolutely.
It's a letter born out of the chaos of the Iconium mob and the stoning at Lystra. The theology was hammered out on the anvil of real-world suffering.
It anchors the theology in absolute reality. And if we pull back and look at the core principles the author has laid out for us through this historical text, they are incredibly robust for anyone navigating opposition today.
Let's summarize those takeaways.
First and foremost, we have to decouple the idea of opportunity from the idea of comfort. An open door is often a call to step onto a battlefield.
Second, true faith isn't just passive intellectual agreement. It's the active, present-tense confidence that we saw in the lame man at Lystra.
Right. And third, when you are trying to communicate truth to a culture that is deeply entrenched in its own modern idolatry, you have to step all the way back to the foundation of reality. You have to point back to the Creator.
And finally, true leadership and discipleship demand honesty about the cost. You can't hide the hard truths. You have to prepare people for the reality of the resistance they will face if they choose to stand for something meaningful.
The universe does not just roll out a red carpet when you make the right choice. According to the history we've unpacked today, the open door is a breach in an enemy wall. Paul and Barnabas walked through it, fully aware that the stones were going to fly, because they believed that the people on the other side of that wall were worth the pain.
They understood the mechanics of the spiritual warfare they were fighting, and they refused to let the resistance dictate their direction. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to chew on.
That's a good one.
Think about the path you are on right now. When you face sudden, intense opposition in your own life, whether it's unfair criticism at work, a project hitting a massive cultural roadblock, or just a modern mob mentality turning against you, how do you interpret that friction? How do you know if it's a sign from the universe telling you to pack up and leave, or if it is the ultimate proof that you have just stepped through an open door that actually matters? Keep the dirt, the stones, and the courage of Lystra in mind the next time the resistance hits.